Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Positive Thought Reminder. I'm your host, Nabil Rahman, the mild mannered registered social worker. For today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about thought records and what is it? How can we use it in our day-to-day lives, and especially as it relates to counseling or therapy or any type of self-help modality. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about thought records and its application, its effectiveness, its usefulness, and how you should approach writing one. So we'll be sharing some best practice tips with you. Now, the first question to ask is, what exactly is a thought record? A thought record, think of it as a type of journaling, right? A stress log, a thought record, a self-awareness sheet. The objective of a thought record, especially as it relates to the modality or the way of providing support, namely cognitive behavioral therapy, a thought record is a process by which an individual enhances in awareness of themselves. That is one of the biggest objectives of what a thought record is. Um, think of a time in your life, or it might be something that you're experiencing now, when we experience an emotional, distressing situation, or we feel just down on our luck, or we're feeling anxious many of the time, or depressed, or angry. Sometimes, those feelings come with certain thoughts. And the thoughts that we experience, along with the way that we feel, almost inevitably elicit a certain type of behavior, a response to our external stimuli, to the environment in which we are placed in. So I'll share a simple one with you that is more holistic in nature. And through this process, you can see here, I call this a self-awareness sheet. Now, think of counseling as a process in which the client and counselor relationship is one of mutual collaboration, right? The client is the context experts of their lives, and the counselor or the therapist might be looked at as somebody who is a content expert, right? But one without the other is a missing picture. It's an incomplete picture. It requires the two for the picture to be complete and for counseling to be effective. Now, oftentimes what happens, we're in a space that is conducive to learning, that is non-judgmental, that is a space in which we can explore ourselves, and we can understand what's happening through multiple different perspectives, uh, and we can validate our feelings, we can acknowledge them. It's a very supportive and helpful space to be in. So a thought record is a great tool that counselors might utilize for the individual, for all of us, and for the client to be able to write down their thoughts in the times and space in which they're not together, right? But when you're by yourself, especially when you've had an emotionally distressing experience, sometimes it's hard to come up with the time and space to be able to write what the thoughts you're experiencing are, what the feelings you're experiencing are, what the behaviors you participated in. But just to give you some clarity, when we emotionally react to situations, the part of our brain that's activated and that is sort of in control sometimes of us is a different part of our brain than when we write things down and then we cognitively process that information, right? Our emotions, and especially emotions related to anxiety, anger, they're housed in like the amygdala, the hippocampus, a certain part of our brain, right? And that part of the brain is sort of the fear center. It looks at threats, real or perceived, and it reacts according to the situation that it encounters. Now, when that's all in our heads, it's very hard to distinguish between what was an emotional reaction versus what was a rational response, and what sometimes can be a collection of the two. So, as an example, if we look at something like anger and we write down a situation in which we experienced anger and the collective thoughts that we experienced simultaneously, and afterwards, when the experience was encountered, let's see how that would play out. Let's say public transit was an hour late, right? You have to get to work, now you're going to be late at work. So the situation that you would describe is what that situation was that elicited a certain type of response, right? You write that down. Took public transit was an hour late. I felt extremely angry, helpless. Whatever your feelings are, the next column over, which is the feeling section, this is where you identify your feelings, right? Part of a thought record is important to identify feelings, because feelings can oftentimes be confused for thoughts, and thoughts can be oftentimes confused for feelings. So part of a thought record is to help you make that distinction, right? Think of feelings as one word answers. So often, we briefly mentioned if you're feeling anxious or angry or sad or happy or depressed or hopeless or despair or excited, right? These are all feelings that we experience. And here's the thing with feelings need acknowledgement, right? If you're feeling sad, you need to acknowledge that you're feeling sad. So this is a fantastic activity for you to document what that situation was and what it made you feel like. Oftentimes, the situation that you're asked to describe is something that elicited a certain type of emotional response, maybe a strong one, maybe a positive one, maybe a negative one. And so you write down the emotions that you experience, and we all know that emotions vary in the intensity that we experience them. Sometimes we can be angry, but just mildly. Other times we can be really angry. Sometimes we can be happy slightly, or we can be really happy. So the idea is you want to identify your feelings, but also identify the intensity of which in which you experienced it, right? A rating of 1 to 10, these are all subjective, so there's no right or wrong answer. It is just for you to gain in your awareness of yourself. So however you want to rate what 1 is for you or what 10 is for you, but generally in a scale of 10, I would say 10 is something that you experienced an emotion that overtook you. It was uncontrollable in your reaction and response to that emotion that you experienced. Whereas 1 was you experienced it, but it didn't shift you in either direction. It didn't control you. It didn't overwhelm you. Now, once you experience that feeling, think of what thoughts came your way, right? If you were angry because the public transit or the subway was an hour late, and now it's going to make you late for work, and now you're going to have to rush through your day because you're going to have to get a bunch of things done at work, and you're trying to get to your soccer practice or take your kids to their gymnastics class or what have you, right? Those things are all now starting to pile on top of each other, right? When you're angry, it's important to look at what thoughts are you having. This is a judgment-free zone. Whatever thoughts comes to your mind, I want you to write it down, right? Because what you're doing now is enhancing yourself in your self-awareness. You're writing the thoughts down. Like I said, these thoughts could be like, I'm not going to be able to finish my tasks for the day. I'm not going to be able to go to soccer practice. I'm not going to be able to take my kids to gymnastics class because the bus is late, right? We are having these thoughts almost simultaneously sometimes. And then these thoughts sometimes validate the feelings that we experience. So if you're angry, we might become more angry because these thoughts are further validating the emotional experience. And it's, in fact, maintaining them. It's important to recognize that. So you want to write down what those thoughts are. Similarly, if you have an experience in which you have taken public transit and public transit is an hour late, but maybe you have thoughts like, maybe I can take this time to read a book that I've been putting off. Maybe I can listen to an audiobook, right? I might be a little late to work. Maybe I can start working on some stuff that I have for work in the bus. Potentially thousands of different thoughts you can have, and compare sometimes what thoughts you have and which thoughts you choose to pay attention to. So sometimes we might have one thought that tells us, I'm going to be late for work and I'm going to have too much work to do. And another thought can tell us, hey, maybe I can do a little bit of work while I'm on, the subway or the public transit. But which thought do you pay attention to, and try to connect it to the feeling that you're experiencing? It'll be interesting to see what you can find. What behavior did you participate in, right? When you found out that you're going to be late, what was your behavior? Were there other people waiting for the bus or waiting for the subway with you? How did you interact with them? Were you making eye contact? Were you smiling? Or was it a big, were you slouching? Were you angry? Did you feel yourself having very aggressive behaviors or passive behaviors? Whatever the behavior you engaged in, write that down, right? Were you just pacing back and forth, waiting for the bus or the transit to arrive, right? Write these things down. Lastly, what physical reactions, did you experience? When you noticed that the bus was going to be late, did you feel like your eyes were twitching? Did you feel shortness of breath? Did you feel like you were sweating or that your heart was beating a little bit faster? If you experienced any kind of physical reaction, write that down, because all that these situations help you do is gain an awareness of yourself better. Now, the question to be asked is, when should you do this? What I would suggest and what I have suggested is that pick a time and date, right? Every time, it's particular time of the day, find what works for you, whether that's right before you go to bed, whether that's before your dinner, when you find you have some time and you have some space, and just document what happened, right? You don't have to remember everything. In fact, you have to remember situations that just elicited some level of an emotional response from you, right? That was noteworthy for you. That could be one a week, that could be 50 a week, that could be however many it is for yourself. If you're starting it off, I would suggest try to document what is reasonable and sustainable for you. So it could be 1 to 3 a week, it could be once a day. But the idea behind this is that this activity is not done for the benefit of the counselor, or it's not done for the benefit of whoever created the worksheet. It's done for your benefit. So the buy-in has to be there for you. It has to be understood that this, when you write stuff down, right, when you physically write stuff down or type it out, then you allow a different part of your brain, the rational part of the brain, the neocortex, to give it an opportunity to analyze what just happened. So along with your emotional response to situations, you're allowing yourself the opportunity to respond and reflect and understand what that experience was, what that situation was, also through a rational, the rational part of your brain. So you're giving yourself the best chance you have to gain a better understanding of yourself. So this is one self-awareness worksheet that I wanted to share with you. There is another one very quickly that concentrates mostly just on the thoughts that you have. So this thought record starts off very similarly, where you identify a situation that brought about a particular emotional distress, right? What thoughts did you have? Now, this is the interesting part with this thought record, is that it goes the next mile, where it says, why don't you analyze the evidence you had for that thought? We talked about you're running late to work, you might miss your soccer practice, you might miss taking your kids to gymnastics. Well, what's the evidence for that thought? How realistic and accurate is having that thought? Are you confusing the thought for facts? Provide the evidence. This is where you would write down the evidence, right? You're letting the rational and the cognition take over and be able to sort of look at the situation. Similarly, evidence against having this thought. Is this thought entirely true? Am I for sure going to miss soccer practice? Am I not going to be able to make arrangements for my kids to be taken to gymnastics? Am I going to have tons of work to do? Can I manage it? Right? Evidence against having thoughts that you might have had. And lastly, come up with an alternative thought that could replace the thought that you had. Again, our minds and our brains goes and shuffles through countless thoughts in a day, thousands of thoughts in a day. How many of those thoughts do you remember? Right? It's critical to know that sometimes we pay attention to thoughts, and our paying attention to that thought elicits a certain emotional response based on what that thought is. The thought validates the emotion. And if we don't recognize that, emotions also then elicit behavioral responses. And sometimes we think that when we're angry, we are justified and validated to behave a certain way because we're angry. A thought record is a great way to know that you can acknowledge your feelings without rationalizing, validating a behavior that was not necessarily helpful for you to meet the desired goals you have for yourself, right? Behaviors and feelings are not the same thing. Sometimes when you're angry, ask yourself, do I have a right to behave aggressively? Right? And this is what a thought record can help you do. It can help you look at patterns of your thinking that elicit a certain type of feelings, and then what behaviors do you partake in, and figure out that are there different ways for us to externalize our thoughts, externalize our feelings in the behaviors in which we partake in. So guys, that is a thought record. I wanted to share that with you because I think it's an immensely helpful tool. Like I said, the time that you spend apart from your counselor, or if you're working on your own self-help, I would recommend you just put it on your calendars, put it on anything that you have where you can say, at this time of the day, I'm going to take 10, 15 minutes of my time to write a thought record of anything that happened that sort of, stood out to me. Do it. You will see how fantastic this experience is for you, how much an awareness you're going to gain of yourself. So guys, thank you so much for watching. This is Nabil, your mild-mannered registered social worker. Until next time, guys, take care.